subjective and talking about the zoo's experiences of social media. So basically, as digital marketing manager, I suppose I oversee these 4 charities, as they are. And probably predominantly I'll be speaking with experience from those 2 more than anything. So for the digital marketing strategy for the zoos and the Whitley Wildlife Conservation Trust, we mainly concentrate on Facebook and Twitter. We have a growing profile on YouTube, which I want to utilise a lot more. And if I had the time, I'd spend more time on LinkedIn as a company profile, as they call it, expanding those, and Google Plus also. But I'm going to be talking about Facebook and Twitter more than anything. And here are all the Twitter names and the Facebook names. Unfortunately, for branding purposes, we've managed to secure the right names, which is quite lucky. So building your brand, we all want to expose our brand to a bigger audience. A bigger audience means more potential leads. So obviously, you know, my objective is to get the zoos seen to a bigger audience on social media. One example that I came across last year was Coca-Cola's Facebook page, which is a very good example. I mean, you can see how seriously they take it with, well, actually, if you go up there, you can see they've got just shy of 80 million likes, which is incredible. They've padded out their Facebook page, the timeline, really well. You've got the iconic Coca-Cola brand as their main profile picture. The cover photos good. They've got a hashtag of Trophy Tour, which makes reference to one of these apps here, which is obviously an ongoing campaign. They've got branding up in the corner, Coca-Cola branding everywhere. These, if you don't know, are called Facebook timeline apps. Usually you just see the top 4, but by clicking the drop-down arrow, you can actually have up to 12 of them. And you can see that Coca-Cola have utilised them to the max and made it a very global thing. I mean, there's one here in Greek, one here, looks Eastern European, one there in French, and also they've utilised. You can track back to the. Actually, I've cut it off. It actually says founded, which goes beyond the 1800s. So this is how effectively Coca-Cola have used their Facebook page. I haven't actually emulated that very well. You can see from the timeline. We opened back in, when was it, Joe? A long time ago. If I ever get the time, I will expand on that. But basically, I've tried to use the apps. I've just introduced a TripAdvisor Facebook app. If you go into Facebook, there are apps that you can utilise, and that TripAdvisor is one of them, which is probably relevant to those of you, the accommodation providers amongst us. And also, I mean, basically looking at the page, I've made sure that the profile, we've got the branding there, the logo, the main logo. I've used a picture of the giraffe calf, which is very much a big seller at the moment for the cover photo. There's a bit of a giraffe theme going on throughout our presentation. And also, another key point is filling out as much information, as much relevant information as possible. Here we go. Here's an example of a very good Twitter profile page. The Barista Bar, not very relevant to Torbay, but anyway. You can see from this example that they've got a fantastic background, which is mirrored in their header photo. Good use of their logo. Descriptions filled out, so you know they're in San Francisco. The location is filled out, so you know that they're in San Francisco. The only thing they fall down on, and I'm not quite sure why, is that they don't actually list their website, so we'll deduct marks for that. But other than that, it's a very striking page. Social media. Why social media? For us, word of mouth marketing happens that Neil alluded to, which is very much people talking about your brand on social media. So it's important to be there. So if we weren't on Twitter, we wouldn't know if someone's not particularly happy with us. We wouldn't know when someone's complimenting us. So it's important to be where your audience is in that respect. So you can retweet, praise, or address any complaints. Social media provides transparency. So the advantage it has over TV, radio, and press advertising is that customers can come to you and ask you questions about a particular campaign, and you can respond to them. Customer service is also another huge, I was going to use the word issue, but a huge point. Again, one of Neil's points was that people are not using email so much, they're using social media more. And I seem to spend quite a chunk of time responding to inquiries that Paignton Zoo gets, in particular, through Facebook and to an extent Twitter. So, we've got to be proactive and answer those queries. Obviously, social media is great for connecting with your audience. You can build one-to-one relationships. One of the key things is not to sell, it's to engage, not to preach. Your competitors are on social media, so obviously you can see what they're up to, get inspiration from their campaigns. And, well, it stays in the obvious, but your audience is on social media. And it's up to you as businesses to go out and identify which social media platform your audience is on, and then basically build your brand around that particular social media platform, be it Pinterest, be it Twitter, be it LinkedIn. I've got a few boring stats now that I lifted off a recent Twitter ad. It was basically a campaign Twitter were doing for their Twitter ads. So the statistics are very interesting, but I think they should be taken with a pinch of salt in that I think, as it's Twitter promoting their ads, they probably inflated it. But anyway, 73% of people follow a small medium enterprise for updates on products, 85% of tweets more engaged, more blah, 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 blah. 80% are likely to recommend small medium enterprise to friends. And the final slide of the statistics, 72% of followers are likely to make a purchase after following a company. That one I find particularly interesting. And if it was 72%, I think we could all retire, all everyone who works at Paignton. I don't think that's true at all. But even if it's half that statistic, it's still pretty impressive. Social media has an element of SEO value to it, in that in the good old days when Google first appeared on the scene and became the household name that it is, Google used backlinks from other websites to your own website as an indicator of quality. But now the goalposts have moved, and Google being Google or wherever the goalposts are moving, and basically people through social media point to websites, and Google have taken that into account. So, and obviously other search engines. So now it's all taken in. You've got to take into account retweets and Facebook likes and Google +1s. So that's all factored in. But also another key point in reference to that is that links still are important. Don't get me wrong. It's backlinks to your website is still important, but I would suggest concentrating not on stressing out over backlinks to your website, but instead concentrating more on social media, because a link to your website from some quality website somewhere is not going to bring users to your website, whereas social media links will. And to that end, my ethos is it's very important to try and get as many links, get the content that you are promoting and that you're flagging up on social media on your website. This is your main asset, your website and your blog. These are, well, not simply tools for flagging up your website, but it is important, as we all know, to transcend traffic to your website. And basically, these are also SEO indicators that you're bringing in users and SEO brownie points, let's say. An example of that in action is, this is a screenshot of Paignton Zoo webpage on the job site. And this was a recent job we advertised back in, because the press release was live on the website. I tweeted it, shared it on Facebook, and it brings in the traffic, and they in turn spread the good word. The big Twitter logo is because I must admit I've borrowed lots of slides I did from a Twitter presentation last year, so I'll quickly whiz through that. I might just take a quick second while you digest that statistic. I've recently read that this is very true of Facebook as well. This has actually come from Twitter themselves. Where I read the Facebook stat, I cannot remember, but they suggest doing between 3 to 5 posts a day. This is Guy Kawasaki, who some of you may know. He's basically a marketing guru, online marketing guru, I should say. I've nicked this slide from someone's SlideShare presentation, but there's some really interesting statistics. He's got 1.4 million followers. He tweets 50 times per day. However, the one point that I'd like you to take away that I do employ, not to a huge extent, but he tweets at least 4 times for each tweet. So while one tweet has a bit of a short shelf life, and I'll give evidence of this a bit later, he tweets 4 times once every 8 hours. So I mean, he's very much reaching a global audience. However, I'm very conscious of the fact that one tweet is sometimes not enough, and you can send them a couple of days apart, or send one in the morning, one in the evening. Ignore the 50 times, tweeting 50 times per day. Don't think, oh my God, I'm going to tweet 50 times per day, because this chap does it for a living. The 3 to 5 times a day that Twitter recommends, I think, is a good rule of thumb. I read also recently from HubSpot.com that between 12 to 15 tweets a day is like the sweet spot, they called it, which will gain you more followers, basically tweeting every hour, which I think is not too bad, but again, it's still quite a lot. The content the rule of thumb content that I try and adhere to is making the content, well, I probably shouldn't have used the word funny, but witty, let's say, humorous, helpful. Tips are always very useful. Newsworthy. Obviously, we've got the benefit of sharing press releases, but in addition to that, I do find myself going onto the BBC News website and sharing their news stories, or maybe it might be National Geographic or one of the broadsheets websites. Inspiring as well. The content links are, again, it's pointing back to a website. If you can include a link in your Facebook post or your tweet pointing back to a website, that is brilliant. Pictures and videos do tend to get more retweets. It's worth bearing that in mind. Quotes, sometimes it's nice to quote an authority within your industry. And questions and answers, which I'll go on to in the next slide, which is something that I haven't actually used, but it's quite good for quite a good thing to use for content, is that you could put up a tweet or a Facebook post basically saying 10 reasons people buy a new car, and then linking back to your website. You can make it more topical. Well, who was wearing the best dress at the Oscars, and you can link it either to your website or to a relevant website. And the golf one is very similar. It's basically directing people back to your website, but you're giving them tips, not just giving them the hard sell. Here we've got some stats that, again, I used for my presentation last year. The Buddy Media survey is actually back in 2012, so it's a little bit dated, but I think the indicators of the stats are very good. Tweets that contain links receive 86% more retweets than links with no links. So that's something really to take on board, that if you put a link in, as at the time in the form of a slide, but Buddy Media said that the opposite is the case for Facebook, i.e. it's better to put your Facebook posts out in the evening and at the weekends. And for Paignton Zoo, there's an element of truth to that. I'll get onto it later with an example, but I do find that we get more activity on Twitter if we tweet during the day than we do in the evening. And the same for Facebook. If we do a Facebook post in the evening, it works a lot better than it does during the daytime. But again, it's up to you. I'm talking from the point of view of Paignton Zoo, Living Coast, Newquay Zoo. For your industry, it might be different. It's when your people, when your audience, when your business audience are online, or your customers rather. Tweets that contain less than 100 characters receive 17% higher engagement than longer tweets. So there have been times where I've stressed over hacking everything into 140 characters, some statement, but you don't have to worry about that. Try and get it as little as possible, less than 100 characters, ideally. Again, just to reiterate, this is from 2012, so maybe people are using hashtags more. But the fact that only 24% of tweets are everywhere, indeed there's now a Torbay hour and an hour Newton Abbott, and I'm sure there'll soon be an extra hour and all the rest of it. But anyway, Devon Hour was one of the leaders in this, and between Wednesday 8 till 9 p.m. tonight, you can go on to Twitter between 8 and 9 p.m. and just attach hashtag Debonair to your tweet, basically you're reaching out to a far bigger audience. You're not just reaching out to your followers who happen to be on Twitter at that moment. You're reaching out to anyone who's going to be searching the hashtag Debonair. So you're effectively reaching out to a far, far bigger audience. And sticking with hashtags, and this is obviously a very topical one. Hashtag open for business. This is obviously in the news at the moment because obviously now that the line is down at Dawlish, we're completely isolated from the rest of the world. But we've got to put across the message that that's not actually the case. And Southwest England, or their Twitter name is @Southwest UK, from my own personal experience, have been absolutely brilliant. If I send out an email, a tweet rather, with hashtag open for business on it, there is a very, very good possibility that Southwest England will retweet it. And you can see that they've got a big, big following of 10.4 thousand people. So that's effective use. A lady asked earlier about measuring and monitoring your social media activity. I apologise, I've been left with egg on my face slightly because that and that refer to Google Analytics, but they're now outdated because Google Analytics have changed the format. So to start from the top, Google Analytics, if you go into, I forgot what it is, acquisitions, I knew I'd forget the name, it's not traffic source anymore. Look for something that looks like acquisitions and then all referrals. You will see referring traffic to your website. T.co is from Twitter. Interestingly, one of our biggest referrals is from Facebook, but m.facebook, the mobile version of Facebook. So the majority of Paignton zoos, I'm talking in the context of Paignton Zoo now, our referral traffic comes from m.facebook, t.co or Twitter, not so much. Another way of monitoring your activity on social media is by taking your URL and putting it into a URL shortener. bit.ly is a very good one. Hootsuite does it if you use Hootsuite, and also Google have their own version. And finally, the Google custom URL builder is very good. I mean, if you literally Google custom URL builder, or put in Google just in case, it's a very good way of putting in, you can basically put in campaign name, source name, you can basically really drill down into, it's perfect for campaigns, and basically every time someone clicks on it, it will appear in your Google Analytics. So it's a very good way of analysing campaigns that you do on social media. Another way of measuring success, this slide is in the context of Twitter. You can see from how your follower growth on Twitter is going, and obviously that's ditto likes on Facebook. Follower quantity and engagement, how many retweets you're getting, again on Facebook, how many likes an article is getting, how many times that's being shared. Traffic, again, I suppose that refers slightly to the previous slide. You can see from Google Analytics how traffic is being driven to your website. You can judge it from there. And obviously conversions. If you've got conversions set up in your Google Analytics, a very effective way of measuring how effective your social media campaigns are doing. Sorry, just have to excuse me for a minute because I've got so many slides and I don't want to run over. I'm trying to be as fast as I can. Facebook are infinitely better than Twitter at telling you, giving you insights. If you're logged in and you're the administrator, you will get page insights. And just up there off the screen is a button up there saying insights. You've got all these headings. I've just done a screenshot of posts, but also you can go to people, so you can actually see your main demographic, which I find quite interesting. So our main demographic, even though I haven't got a slide for it, is women between the ages of 25 to 35, I think, which is about 70%. So it's very interesting to see what market is, or what segment of the market is using Facebook. But that aside, this particular page of posts is fantastic for deciding when you're going to actually schedule posts. So you can see here when your fans are online. So this is Facebook telling me days of the week that they're online, and it's pretty much flatlining. So it tells me that it doesn't really matter which particular day of the week I post. There's always going to be the same amount of people. But this chart here is the key one. I don't know if anyone at the back you can see, but it's basically a timeline starting from going from midnight to midnight, a 24-hour day. And our Paignton Zoo peak is 9 p.m. Sorry, I should have said this is the Paignton Zoo Facebook page, but you can probably gauge that from the logo at the top. And because of that, we do post during the day, but if it's a particularly important Facebook post, let's say like the seasonal jobs advert, which I thought would do particularly well, I scheduled that to go more in this sort of sweet spot area, you know, the sort of golden hour between 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Just as it's coming up to peak traffic. I'll talk about these 3 posts in a minute actually. So again, this is about measuring what works and what doesn't. I'll come back to that. Reviews are obviously a big part of social media now, which Neil spoke about, and I think Andrew might be touching on. Obviously, we're affected by, I haven't got a slide for TripAdvisor, but Paignton Zoo, we are, I think I'm safe in saying, the most reviewed attraction in Devon on TripAdvisor. And now Facebook have very much got in on the action, and indeed Google+. And for Facebook, I mean, this is obviously a screenshot of the desktop version of Facebook, not the mobile, but it's still the reviews we get are still very high profile. So it's, and I suppose if you're like me, if you do look at an attraction, a restaurant, a hotel, we always go to the bad reviews just to see what someone's saying. And because of that, we have to address the bad reviews. And I'm now talking in the context of TripAdvisor and indeed Facebook. But what you can do, how you can manipulate the situation, if someone does give you a bad review, and we get bad reviews sometimes on TripAdvisor on the strength of Duchess the elephant. So if today you go up and explore the zoo, you'll see Duchess, who does look, I mean, she's a very old lady and she's on her own, and there is a reason for that. And even though there's signage up there saying why she's on her own and why she looks dishevelled, people don't read it half the time. And occasionally they get through TripAdvisor and they complain about the elephant. So then I have the opportunity to turn it around and explain why she is the way she is, but also to put a positive spin on it and to give a little bit of a plug to an elephant feed and say, well, she's at her happiest when she's eating, which she is. And if you were to come along to an elephant feed, you'll actually see this for yourself. So you could kind of twist it and plug things. Also, sometimes we get complaints from people about Living Coast and Newquay Zoo, which is much smaller sites than Paignton Zoo. And you can whiz round it in 15 minutes, no problem, without really looking at the exhibits. And obviously it's an opportunity for me if someone says, oh, I went it in half an hour, you don't need that long, but to say, well, you should basically take more advantage of it. And if you basically, it's an opportunity for me to highlight the penguin feeds and, well, the feeds in general. If someone asks for about, actually no, I'm jumping a point, basically Facebook, and indeed, as you can imagine, people latched onto it, started sharing it. I mean, it's pretty much Paignton Zoo's wedding campaign, marketing campaign in a picture. And as a result of the social media campaign, the press picked up on it. I think maybe the Herald Express led the way, but it did literally go global, and there were websites debating whether the actual picture had been photoshopped. It did phenomenally well. Going back to Twitter and use of hashtags, this one I quickly knocked up in Photoshop and put on the Open for Business hashtag. Sent it out, made sure that I had the hashtag Open for Business, and I chucked in a hashtag for Devon and Cornwall, being mindful not to go over 3 hashtags. And lo and behold, my good friends at Southwest basically retweeted it, as they always do. And basically, if you do a search, the same applies to Devon Hour. If you do a search tonight, the hashtag Devon Hour, hashtag Open for Business, I mean, I've clicked photos there. You can see what everyone's up to. You can see Dartmoor Zoo are doing something similar. I mean, basically, that it's a good way to get inspiration from hashtags to see what other people are doing. Not necessarily from photos, but you can see from click videos and people, just by doing a search on the hashtag. This is an example of, I'm a huge fan of retweeting or sharing customers or visitors' experiences on Twitter or Facebook. Obviously, someone's just taken a quick snap, but it's a really good picture, even though it's taken on their mobile. I mean, it says so many things. This is taken at Living Coast, for those of you not familiar with Living Coast. So I've retweeted it, but I've adopted the retweet, so I've put great photo, and then I've actually added the hashtags penguins and hashtag open for business, and lo and behold, there's Southwest UK in there again, retweeting it. So I got 4 retweets just from someone's innocuous picture. So I've gone back to the insights page on Facebook, and I just wanted to talk quickly about the 3 top posts. Basically, you can get them in order of success, if you like, or how well they've done, with a little bit of clicking the right buttons. And even though these are for the last quarter, they were actually within 2 weeks of each other back in February, mid-February. So this first one, someone posted on our Facebook page. Again, like the previous Living Coast picture, this is of a visitor's photo, and it's a lovely picture, again, of a giraffe calf being licked by her mother. I mean, I've actually added, when I shared it, open for business, as I said before earlier in my presentation, hashtags on Facebook. You can use them now, hashtags, but they don't work as effectively as hashtags on Twitter, but I chucked it in just for good measure. And it was really effective. It got shared 67 times and got seen by 11,000 people. And funnily enough, just going back to the Insights page, I don't know if it's coincidence or there was an element of planning, I must admit. These were all sent out. This was sent out Saturday morning, the last one I'll come to. The one I've just shown you was sent out late Saturday morning. And the one I'm about to come to was sent out Saturday lunchtime. So there's a bit of a Saturday theme. But my thinking was, I mean, it's just by coincidence. I just shared that as soon as I saw it for that one. So that was fairly random. But my thinking was always, if I share something on a Saturday morning, certainly for Paignton Zoo, people chill out at the weekend, check out Facebook, and our Facebook posts always seem to do particularly well if I send them out on a Saturday morning, or indeed on an evening. Again, a Saturday morning post. I almost binned this picture. I thought, well, I'll just chuck it up on Facebook, see how it does. It was very much an experiment. It was test, which is something you should always do on social media. But this one worked really well. I just put in a quirky caption of little and large, giraffe calf at Paignton Zoo Environmental Park. I made sure I hot linked whatever the Facebook equivalent is by putting the @ symbol in front of our name, so that anyone who shared it, our tag would come up. So the fact it got 96 shares was fantastic, and 15,000 people saw this post. This last one is a fantastic example. I mean, this just did astonishingly well. Our last, to put it into context, for 2013, our most popular Facebook post of the year was probably seen by 20,000 people. So you're probably having to squint at the back. Basically, the story is, well, historically, what happened? Someone sent me 2 pictures with this text, basically saying that it's a family who visited it. They have a severely disabled baby, and in the ape house, the baby was crying rather a lot. So they picked it up, and they were absolutely blown away by the integration that one of the gorillas had with it. So you can see, I don't know if you can make out, I mean, the pictures aren't brilliant, but in the second frame, the picture's got a particularly inane grin on its face. So basically what I did was I stitched them together on Facebook so I could have them across the 2 columns, so there was a big banner there, because I thought it was a really nice, touching story. And I mean, I'm not saying as a result of that, but I think as it was such an inspiring story, it just did fantastically well. To the extent that 37,500 people saw this post, which is almost double our most successful post of 2013. It was shared 263 times, and also comments were a key factor, and 123 people commented on it. Interestingly, on Twitter, I took that same picture, and obviously I'm limited the amount of text I have, but I made a bit.ly link of that page. and so I could basically measure how many people would actually go from Twitter to Facebook to read the story. And I posted it at least 2 or 3 times on Twitter, and it got retweeted about 4 or 5 times, which compared to the Facebook activity is not very much. However, what was key was the bit.ly link informed me that over 200 people actually clicked through the link. So on Twitter, no one could be bothered to retweet the story, but they did actually click through to the link, and read the story, which is perfect. I think that's just got 2 slides left. Getting near the end. This is just changing the subject completely, but staying with social media. My wife's battery on her car packed up recently, so I googled car battery fitting in Newton Abbot, my nearest town, and you can probably see that we've got the 3 AdWords ads there, and then this one is the first organic result. But the second one, I thought, hang on a minute, and this is this chap through using Google Plus, creating his own profile, a profile for National Task. He's managed to bump himself right up the rankings to the 2nd place on a local search, which I thought was very impressive. So I think Andrew in the next presentation, in 2 presentations from now, will touch on Google Plus. But for me, it really is. I mean, it has been a bit of a sleeping giant for a couple of years, but it's just slowly waking up. So Google Plus is certainly something you should have a look at. And finally, final slide. How social media works on mobile. Again, it's a point that Neil touched on, how mobile friendly it is, and the apps that you can get, Twitter, Facebook, and everything else. The Zoo's websites at this moment in time don't look that great on a mobile device of that size. However,
we're running against time today. Rather than let you have a sleep now, we're going to do a little worked example of how to use social media and problems that can arise from using social media. And my colleagues and some people from the zoo are passing you around booklets at the moment. We'll come to. But what we're going to do a little worked example, and there's a warning, we're not going to get everything right. So there's some errors in here, there's some things we should do which we haven't done, and maybe we're going to do some things which we shouldn't have done. So we'll run through that, you can have a little look and see if you spot the problems. If you're listening to Neil earlier, you should have spotted at least 3 of them. So a bit of a challenge for you all. Everyone's here because we either use social media or want to use social media in our business. Therefore we thought we can pick on any of you. There's a lot here from the hospitality and tourism industry. We also thought, fair's fair, we'll pick on ourselves. So we're going to present a scenario of a little firm we've made up, Nutty and Nutter. I'll leave you to decide who's who. And what we're going to do is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek parody of something which is potentially offensive. It's been put on the website in these circumstances. It's going to be a tweet. Now it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek, it's not meant to offend, and the 3 of us who will be doing this, I'll introduce Wendy, who works with us at Totnes branch. Wendy's principal employment lawyer there. Jacob is a paralegal who works with me in Torbay. None of us are actors, although if you've been watching social media recently, you will know we've each got as many Oscars as Leonardo DiCaprio, so we're doing well. And what we're going to do with this firm, I'm going to take the role of senior partner, so that way I don't have to do any of the work. Wendy's going to take the role of a staff partner, and Jacob's going to get a massive promotion. He's going to be the assistant solicitor. So if we go to the complaint itself and the scenario, and I don't know how well you can see it on there, but it's on the front page of your workbooks anyway. So to start the scenario, it's a stage right. Wendy.
Yes.
Have a complaint. That bloody kid, see what he's tweeted, Fagash Wednesday, pictures of smoking priest? Had complaints about it. I want the tweet down and I want him disciplined. Sort it, please.
Okay, so as a staff partner, which is me, the senior partner's just asked me to sort it. what he probably doesn't realise is there's certain steps that I have to take and have to go through a disciplinary process and have to follow the ACAT's Code of Conduct on disciplinary procedures. So, first of all, I need to do an investigation, which is I need to look at the individual complaint, make sure it's not a hoax, look at the tweet itself, decide whether it is offensive. It is religious, so it could easily offend. Is it disrespectful to our firm? Does it damage our professional image? These are the things that I would have to take into consideration. So I would also look at Jacob's personnel records, look at whether there's any misconduct with their previous misconduct issues. I'd look at the policies and procedures and guidelines on social media, which you will find in your packs on page 2. There's extracts. I'd look to see whether Jacob had any training or on social media, and on the basis of all that, I decide whether there's sufficient evidence to take disciplinary action against Jacob. So, on the basis of that and everything I've looked into for the purpose of the scenario, I've decided yes, there is sufficient evidence to take disciplinary action, and so the next step would be for me to write to Jacob and invite him to a disciplinary hearing. So, on page 3 of your pack, you'll see there's a letter that I've drafted to Jacob. This letter needs to set out his statutory rights, which are that he's got the right to be accompanied at the hearing by a colleague or a trade union rep, and also it sets out the details of the allegation of misconduct and advising on the potential outcome following the disciplinary hearing. So this meeting went ahead. Jacob was presented with the evidence, and the evidence that I presented him with was obviously the complaints received about the tweets. I also went through with him the policies and procedures and guidelines on social media, and in particular, if you refer to page 2 of your pack, you'll see that it says in the policy that needs to be respectful, and it says never post anything that might be offensive to others, and remember that talk of religion can easily offend others, and you'll see that he's obviously not paying any attention to that. So Jacob then had the opportunity to respond the allegations, and we will now attempt to dramatise the end of that meeting for an effect for you all. So, Jacob, normally we'd sit down for this, but you won't be able to see, so. Jacob, I presented you the evidence, and I've listened carefully to what you had to say. I'm of the view that the tweet is offensive, and it has in fact caused offence, because we've had complaints from clients. I do believe it has damaged the reputation of our firm. So this tweet is clearly in breach of our social media policy and guidelines.
I hold my hands up. What can I say? I'm sorry.
Well, given the evidence, I'm going to have to issue you a written warning. Okay? It's going to remain active on your file for 6 months, and if there's any further breaches, then there'll be a final written warning. Do you understand everything I've told you?
Yes.
Okay. I'll confirm my decision to you in writing, and I'll also confirm that you have a right to appeal against my decision. Okay, so just to ask you, are you clear about our policy on social media, or do you want more training?
No, I understand.
I'll have to go through the policy with you if you need me to.
No, thank you.
Do you want any questions or anything? Okay, well, are you sure?
Yes, we'll draw a line under it and
Okay.
we'll see where we go.
Okay. Well, I'll now call an end to this meeting. Thank you, Jacob.
Thank you. I don't know about you, I thought they were very stuffy and humorless. The reality is, in this scenario, it's me. I set up all of the social media, I use it. The clients are mine, the contacts are mine. And the trouble with a scenario like this is now, yes, I have a restricted covenant, so I can't trade for 6 months, but I've had enough. Now I'm gone. I'm a young lad, I've got tattoos, and this is the door that's going to push me out. And you should now see what happens once I've gone. Oh, I know.
So Jacob's left us. And, we had to get someone else in now to do our social media. We had to set up a new Twitter account, regain all our followers. Nightmare. But the trouble started 6 months later. See, Jacob joined a rival firm. I'm sure there's one of you might want him.
Hopefully.
I tried. I did say I tried. The clients, it was his Twitter account. They were already linked to him and knew as soon as he left. Once his restrictive covenant ran out and he was able to trade again, they had a whole strategy waiting. They pounced on it, they messaged the clients. We lost thousands of pounds worth of work before we even knew what was happening. So, it's a little scenario, say not the best acted, none of us are professional for that. But you've got the message, as it were. So it's now time for you to do a little bit of work. What did we do wrong? What did Nutty and Nutter get wrong? What do you think we could have got better? Come on, don't need this much now. Nobody. Go on.
The Twitter account should have been a company's, not a personal account.
Correct. One of the big errors on here was, and you will see, I jokingly said I'm a senior partner, I'm going to let the others do the work. And it's a point that Neil made earlier on. How many of the managers are actually controlling their Twitter image? Jacob, in the scenarios for young kid, he's just been told, do it, sort it out. So it's his account. He's got all the contacts. Had he used his own Twitter account, had he used a company Twitter account, we could have had another password on it. We could have taken the tweet down before anyone noticed it. When Jacob left, he wouldn't have had all those details to take with him. And we could have had another password on it. So the moment he left, that account just continues with somebody else operating it. So a very practical thing we could have done very differently and stopped losing all those clients and that work. There are more errors than that. So anyone else?
Bit of a confidentiality clause in terms of conditions that
We could have done. We did have a restrictive covenant, but restrictive covenants can only go for 6. There'd be an argument, and I'm sure from the guest list there are some other lawyers in here, there's a very good argument. From a 6-month restrictions, we need to have a better thought out social media principle. What are we doing? What are we trying to do, and why are we trying to do it? And if Jacob had been sat down, trained in that, and it was part of an overall strategy, this probably wouldn't have happened. And then we wouldn't have lost Jacob, we wouldn't have had all the problems and lost work from it. Anyone else? Any other bits you think we might have got wrong? Do you want to flick up the slide, Jacob, see if we missed any? LinkedIn separation. I think largely we pretty much got there with them. So Jacob used his own Twitter account. He should have been administering a company one. We could, with the social media policy, have had a much better split between what is personal accounts and what is business accounts. Now, the reason for that split wouldn't necessarily be in the policies and the documents to say private clients cannot follow your private tweets or they cannot follow you privately on LinkedIn. But are they going to? If you've got a policy that says your business work and your business tweets, your business social media is going in this direction, and your tattoo art's going in this direction, there's going to be no reason why the business clients are going to follow the tattoo art unless they're interested in it. And if they are, it's not really the business's concern one way or the other. But by having that separation of accounts and very clear in the documentation, we would know where the lines are and what sort of behaviour falls on what side of it. Again, it's all about preventing the problem. Dealing with problems is expensive, preventing them takes a bit of thought, a bit of time. Sometimes it's advice, but quite often it's just common sense. The others, as we said, LinkedIn is a much harder prospect. You do have company pages on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn is like a Facebook for the business community, but a lot of it is about private connections between two individuals. If in our scenario Jacob was a personal injury lawyer and all of the personal injury work we were getting was coming through a named contact or gatekeeper, I would want to protect that. And I would do so by way of a restrictive covenant which would name that specific gatekeeper or that firm which is the gatekeeper and try and protect that contact from going on LinkedIn. I'm not going to try and prevent Jacob using LinkedIn or connecting to clients. It's not proportional. He's a junior. If I try and do that, he's going to ignore it and there's going to be nothing I can realistically do to enforce it. But if I can identify the 1, the 2, 3 key contacts, I can try and protect that information and keep that off LinkedIn in that circumstance. Now, it does come back to a lot of what Neil said on social media. You can't protect everything. You must engage with complaints and engage with that side. Once it's on social media, you won't protect it. So your protection there is what do you prevent going on social media if it's in your staff and in your control. So, I think we'll flip to the next slide, which is some soul searching. We have openly got a lot wrong in that scenario to give us a few things to talk about and a few things to think about. But let's give some credit now to Nutty and Nutter. They got a lot right. They had a social media policy, which I imagine a lot of you won't have. That social media policy was linked to the contract of employment you'll see in there, and it was linked to the guidelines that Jacob was given as a business tweeter. There were those guidelines for business use of social media, what is respectful, what isn't. There is also a restrictive covenant, which, although not expanded enough and specific enough, does cover part of this situation. So the challenge I would give to every business here is how many of you can honestly hold your hands up and say, my business is doing better than Nutty and Nutter were doing. And the sad truth is, they probably did a lot better than most of us. So, before we sort of finish up on this, does anyone have any questions or anything they would like to ask about the scenario or social media in the law? If there's some employment questions, I'm sure Wendy will stand up and field them.
One question, maybe more an observation. I'm aware of a company at the moment that has a real concern and problem with a Twitter account that's been set up, and it's basically exposed some wrongdoing in that organisation. The problem for the company concerned is that what's been exposed is true, and they're trying desperately to find out who's behind the Twitter account, and they can't. And I rightly believe that if you're in that situation, it's very, very difficult to find out who is behind that Twitter account unless you actually serve legal proceedings through, I understand, actually in California.
That is a difficult one. I hold my hands up. I don't know all of the answers to that. The short answer is it is very difficult to find out who is behind Twitter accounts, especially if that account isn't doing anything in breach of the law or in breach of Twitter's service, terms and conditions of service. We've got a case at the moment which doesn't involve Twitter but involves LinkedIn, where somebody's doing a similar thing and is saying there's associations they have with the business that they don't have with that business. Now, in that scenario, we've been able to write to LinkedIn, inform them of the situation, give them evidence, and they've taken all of that account down. But in your scenario with Twitter, if the account isn't doing anything to breach of the guidelines or not doing anything unlawful, in theory, yes, we could look at some sort of order for information from the Californian court. But if there's no legal grounds to give that information, I don't see that they're going to comply with it.
My understanding is that Twitter will only, they're very protective of the privacy of their users and freedom of speech. They will only release information if there's a valid legal request, i.e. from a law enforcement body, rather than say to a solicitor or a company director.
Yeah, but this is almost the point Neil was making earlier. Yes, there can be a valid legal request, but what is the reason for the valid legal request? If the reason is someone's put something up and I don't like it, if it's not unlawful, the fact I like it or dislike it isn't really relevant. I'm sure there'll be lots of things put on social media over the years that I like or dislike. In fact, I'm afraid of ceiling fans might be one day after this. But unless it's unlawful, why are we going to get a court order or a law enforcement agency to tell Twitter they have to disclose information? So I think on that one, the case is firstly going to be, is there a breach of any laws? Is there a breach of any of the user terms and conditions? And from there, are there grounds to ask Twitter to give the information? Because if we're just making a request for information, they probably won't. And that could be quite a difficult scenario to deal with. Now, if it's an employee who's doing the Twitter control, there's things that can be done, but only if we know who's doing it and are they breaching their terms and conditions of employment. So That is a difficult one. I think afterwards I'll come over, we'll have a chat, because I'd love to work out what could be done on that. But I think the principal thing is going to be working out, has anyone breached the user agreements or the law? And from there, what can we do about it? The big question, what about the cost? If it's going to cost £10,000–20,000 in a Californian court action to be right, and it's going to cost a little bit of reputation and maybe a few £1,000s of good PR and working around and answering the problem on Twitter the other way, it might be cheaper not to worry about the legal answer, but just try and address what's actually happening on a practical basis. But thank you, bloody good question. Anyone else?
I know that some organisations go out of their way to check the personal accounts, Facebook accounts of their employees.
Yes.
And obviously if it's not made private, you can see the general feed. A, can they do that? And B, how far can they go if they see something, like if someone, I don't know, puts up a status saying, I've had a crap day at work today because my boss is an arsehole, you know.
You can do it, you can check things. I haven't had to do any for a while, but last year I think I ended up involved in the dismissals of about 13 people based on what they put on Facebook and Twitter. Now when you're doing a dismissal or a disciplinary on that, it helps to have evidence. In the workbooks, we've given some written guidelines and bits and pieces there to say, this is what you can do on Facebook and Twitter and social media, this is what's acceptable, this is what isn't. And on a social media policy, you would have what is acceptable about bringing the business into disrepute, both on your private accounts and on business accounts. Sent the tweet, got the job, not the one I wanted, but hey ho, it'll do for now. Unfortunately, we read it, it didn't do for now, she was sacked before she got off the train. It happens. So, basically, if you wouldn't put it on the front page of the Herald Express, don't put it on social media.
Sorry, just one more bit then.
Yeah.
At what point would it go from misconduct to gross misconduct, if at all, in those circumstances?
Now that's the point for all things. When does a disciplinary offence become so bad that it's gross misconduct rather than misconduct? That's a judgment call businesses have to make in each case. Having set out rules and guidelines is quite useful. The legal test on it is quite interesting from an employment lawyer's point of view, so Wendy, if I get anything wrong at this, do jump in and correct me. But an employment tribunal will not look to substitute its view for your view as an employer. If you have reached a decision based on a fair investigation, reasonable evidence, facts, and everything sort of seems pretty legit, and it's your decision that it's gross misconduct, the tribunal will not overturn that unless it's a decision that they think no reasonable employer could have made. So if I think it's a slap on the wrists, just make myself a judge, I think it's a slap on the wrists offence. But I can see that someone else would see it's more serious. They could have reached that decision, even though personally I don't agree with it. It's not unfair dismissal, it's gross misconduct, you're allowed to sack the person. I would warn, the employment tribunal is a damn expensive way of finding out whether your decision was good or bad. So you try and take steps to avoid getting that far. But that is the acid test at the end of the day. What did the tribunal decide? Is it a decision that could reasonably have been reached? And that's quite worrying, as sort of my attitudes will be very different to the next person's and the next person's.
I actually have an example of that. I used to have a waitress in the last hotel I worked in, and she was a nightmare. And it was in our guidelines that you were not allowed to use your mobile phone. She didn't have your mobile phone on while you were at work. And she was a waitress with her mobile phone always on her person. But someone sent her a message on Facebook, how much is breakfast at the hotel? And she said, $6.95, but you better go into the Nobel Cafe, 5 items, $1.99. So boss saw that, not a bit happy. He didn't actually take any disciplinary action against her, but he let her know he was watching her, and eventually she left. She now worked in a Asda packing shelves. But I know it's one of those ones that we were probably going to go down the mobile phone route, because it was in the terms and conditions that she shouldn't be using her mobile phone. It's just
or shouldn't be using mobile phone, there'd be an argument for a certain breach of the duties owed between employee and employer, that whilst you're at work you're meant to promote the business. Yes, you don't want people to be too subservient, but there are lines. It's one of those, to me, that would be a borderline case. Maybe you could dismiss, maybe you couldn't. I want to see a disciplinary record of that person over the last couple of years. Is it common? What's been said about mobile phones? And the other one is, with any sets of rules, are you applying them consistently? If you've got a rule that says no mobile phones, and everyone's using the mobile phone, and nothing's done about it, and you sack one person for use of mobile phone, you're on a very sticky wicket at that point.
I guarantee if you've ever went to a hotel, you don't see staff, other than general manager or assistant manager, with the mobile phone. You hardly want to be having your dinner and the wait list is on the mobile phone.
No, it wouldn't be normal.
It wouldn't be normal.
I'll put it this way, if I was going to that sort of hotel and they were ignoring that report, I probably would have taken a suggestion and eaten down the road.
Yeah, definitely.
But no, it's an interesting one again. Any others, or any other? I think I've been given the eyes. So
Matt, let's ask a quick one on a different subject. If a company has, most of their employees have company phones and company laptops, and in their various policies they say that we may monitor use of both, which obviously is perfectly reasonable. Going back to the Facebook example, I suppose there's two questions. If someone is using their company laptop and their company phone for either Twitter or Facebook, which they're allowed to do under the policies, but because of the policy saying that they can be monitored, I suppose there's two parts. One, technically, are they able to see what someone's putting on Facebook? And two, if they so wish to try and monitor that, is that legal? Is that allowed? Are they overstepping the
You'd always
mark?
be looking at proportionality. I would question, would you be able, just by examining someone's laptop, the data isn't necessarily stored on the laptop. I'm rapidly heading into areas I don't fully understand technically. But my understanding is you wouldn't be able to, for instance, log onto my computer now and say, I can see the last 20 tweets and Facebook posts you made. That's stored on some computer in California or wherever it may be. So I'm not sure how much you could bring that data up. I'm sure if you spent enough money and had enough forensic experts on it, you'd be able to discover all sorts. But then, is it proportional? It's going to depend very much on the circumstances of the case. Is it a sensible financial decision to be making? Probably not. But sort of going back to that Twitter case you've got, if there is that right, and there is in the policies and procedures the right to do searches in that way, and that can give the answer, it might actually be a better route for you to try and enforce that and find out who's sending the tweets and controlling the account that way, rather than go through the Californian court route. So it could be a suggestion there. Is it proportional? Is it cost effective? Those are the real decisions we would have to make. But in theory, no reason why we couldn't do that.
What the forensic IT guys can find that's quite phenomenal. Because I've done it with doing investigations into where people bring up porn sites and that sort of thing. And no, I didn't do that. It led this. I went to that site and it led me somewhere else. Oh, actually, no, you didn't. Because your Google history search engine shows on this day you put in that request for that word, and that took you to that site. So it's quite actually what they can find out.
And that's what I was thinking, is that if they've got quite a good IT department,
They might be able to find out a fair
so
bit.
apart from the technical issues, if they just think, well, actually, can we log on to someone's Facebook account, or can we see what they put on there via the hard drive possibly? But also the second part of the question was, legally, under DPA,
is it proportional for a legitimate business reason here? And then we come back to, with that Twitter example, is what's actually being done illegal, or is it going to have a significant business impact? That's going to be the real question. If we can say, all right, maybe on the legality it's borderline, but as an employee this person owes us duties of confidentiality, duties to look after the interests of the business, and they are clearly not doing that, we need to investigate and find out who it is.
And the point for me is with this in social media, which is exactly what we're making here, of course, is actually you need to, as a company, put the policies in place and make sure that you have the parameters and frameworks, because employees will do silly things, but if you're not minimising that risk for them, of course, you're not giving them that duty of care that is very important.
Couldn't back that up enough. Policies, procedures, and having steps in place and doing a fair investigation on these things. I was involved a couple of years ago on the other side of one of these. There was an employee, well, I obviously won't name anyone to give it away, but there was an employee who was sacked locally for downloading reams and reams of pornography. And I think it's fair to say he looked the type, as it were. But we had a look at this with him in some detail. We did the appeal. We started to go through things. We sat down for dates to correlate on this. He was on holiday that week. He couldn't possibly have done it on that computer at that time. And it turned out too late for him, as he'd been sacked and the process was pretty robust. It just missed one or two things. And it was obvious he couldn't have done these things, or at least not all of them. And once we started looking at the dates in more detail, someone else in that organisation could have done that, because he was in the same office, same days, worked every single one of those days, and turned out he had it in for this other chap. So, poor bloke, been sacked, been accused of all sorts in the workplace, and where he worked was not the sort of place where you'd want any reputation like that. We were lucky in his case because the evidence was there and we were able to prove it, sort out settlement, and didn't want to go back. And I think, in fairness, I can't blame him in that scenario. But it was the evidence for the disciplinary process. And had they, in that, done the steps I would take in looking at what was actually downloaded, when it was downloaded, the time limits people were looking at it, it was obvious it at least couldn't all have been this bloke. And we were able to offer an alternative explanation. It did seem to be the truth. The other guy pretty much put his hands up and said, "Oh, all right, you got me." But it was a very difficult case, that one, and very interesting as to what is reasonable for an employer to do in investigating these matters. With that one you're mentioning, if that was a two-man band type operation, there's no way they would have the resources to do the forensic computing type exercises that might be needed. If it was Microsoft, Google, one of the really big companies, well, it's reasonable for them to spend a bit of money and get the evidence right. And courts and tribunals do look at that. So what is the investigation you've done? Why do you think the rules have been breached? And what is reasonable in the circumstances? Mrs. Miggins' pie shop isn't going to have to do the same level of evidence gathering as Google. I think, putting over that, I'm sure I've cut into Andrew's time, so if you have got anything else, please come and see me at the end. I should be doing the Devon Hour tonight, if time allows, but our contact details are on there, and we have put in your workbooklets a little voucher, so if anyone does want to look at their social media policies or bits and pieces, there's a bit of money off this. Please give me a shout.
Thank you, Matt. Okay, for the final presentation, I'll hand over to Andrew.
Thank you, everyone. I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm on last, and it's critical. But how people get found on Google has changed quite dramatically over the last few years. So I just want to, in the short space of time I have, highlight some of the key areas that you should be looking at, and how you can try and influence your search rankings. So first of all, we talk about search engines. Really, there are two main search engines. But in the UK, probably 95% of the traffic goes through Google, 5% through Bing. But we also need to consider YouTube, second biggest search engine in the world, funny enough, owned by Google. And also keep an eye on Facebook. Facebook will start to introduce search. It's getting a lot of interest from advertisers because Google, but Google has information on you based on your search. Facebook has information on you based on a lot of personal information that you have uploaded to Facebook. And advertisers would love to get hold of that information. Now, almost every day I get an email from the online equivalent of Delboy. I can get you to top place on Google. If anyone says that to you, run a mile, because the reality is today, Google take into account things like your search history, your location, whether you're connected to the searcher on Google Plus or you're connected to a company on Google Plus, the type of browser you're using. So you could run the same results on your own personal PC, type in the same phrase in another PC, and you get slightly different results. And also, Google serve up different results if you're searching on a mobile device. So the only real way to get to the first page of Google, to guarantee getting on the first page, is through paid advertising. So what we're trying to do is, when people type in a search term that we're interested in, it's a busy world. We need to say, hey, we're over here. We need to help the search engines. And there are some ways we can do this. For example, every single page on your website should have a unique page title. And preferably that page title should include the key phrase that's related to that web page. Underneath we have the meta description tag. Now this doesn't affect ranking, but it does affect whether people click through to your page from the organic results. This is really saying, hey, if you click through to this page, this is what you see, this is what we can do. So it's a bit like a call to action. And this is, you find this in your content management system. If you've got access to it, your WordPress site, for example. If you haven't, your web developer will. Now the other thing to bear in mind is that, so this is the meta description. There's also a key phrase meta. Friendly URLs. So my URL is /marketing strategy. Some URLs you'll see online /1234568YZ that mean nothing to the search engines. So check that your URLs make sense. Check your page has got a header, H1 header. The headers are just like, if you read a book, your main headline, maybe have some sub-paragraphs. So you're just helping the search engines condense information on that page. But the header, again, uses that key phrase. Then we'll look at something called key phrase density. Now the reality is, you should be writing for your audience. So there is no rule of thumb that says how many times should that key phrase be included in the content. It has to make sense to the reader. So write it for the reader, but bear in mind that it does have an effect on the search engines. If you use images on your page, Google can't see images, so we need to help the search engines again. Image search is becoming more and more important. So if you've got images, make sure that the file name includes the key phrase. Make sure that you've included image alt text, so that any users scroll over the image with their mouse, they get a description of what the image is about. And also look at image size. So a lot of the time we take photographs, we upload them to our website or blog. Normally a photograph is about 5 megs. If you've got lots and lots of photographs or images of 5 megs up there, you'll affect the download speed of your page, which can have a negative effect on your ranking. So optimize your images. There's something that doesn't affect rankings, but we should all would be aware is that in the good old days, it used to be that everyone visited your home page, and then from the home page they decided where they would visit. But through search, people can come directly to specific pages on your website. So every page on your website should be treated as a landing page. So make sure that you have a clear call to action. If people are coming to your page, tell them what you want them to do. Don't just leave it up to them. Some people need guidance. Now I believe that every single page on your website should have your contact details and your social media icons. There's nothing worse than being on a website and thinking, okay, I'm interested in contacting these guys, how do I do it? Well, I've got to come out of the page I'm in and go to the contact us page. Make it easier for people. We've spoken a lot about social media this morning. Some people may come to this page and then leave. Give them the opportunity to connect with you on social media, to follow you on social media. The problem is it's not easy. Not everyone can be number one in Google or on the first page of Google. When someone types in a key phrase, Google takes information from lots of different places and shows up on the search results page. Now this is I don't know how well you can see this, but this is a audience participation. It's a question to the audience. I've put in hotels in Britain. Can anyone tell me what's significant about this page? This is the results that I saw on my PC for that phrase.
The middle section is what stands out to me. The 5-star hotel on the section. Is that 34 or 84?
Which one? This one?
The bottom one. The guest house.
Well, that's an important point. But it's just a part of the issue. That's true too. But the reality is, unless you know,
No hotels in
no organic results. Right? Everything on that page is either advertising, reviews, or relating to something called Google Places for Business. That's quite significant. Now, admittedly, the hotel section is very, very competitive. But perhaps this is the way things are moving. So what can we do with this? Well, we can try and get involved. We can do the things we've mentioned previously on our website. But the other interesting issue is, and this has come up this morning, is why is Google Plus not on the list of social media sites that were popular? Well, one point is that it's about 2 years old, so it's still very young. When Google Plus was first brought out, it was described as Google's equivalent of Facebook, and probably it was. I think Google were a bit miffed that they never had a Facebook type presence, and they brought something out quite quickly. But Google Plus needs to be seen as much more than a social network. Google themselves have described Google Plus as the spine of Google, because Google Places for Business, Google Maps, Google Authorship, Google Knowledge Graph, YouTube are all linked now through Google Plus. Google Plus is integrated with search. We've seen it influence reviews. Now on your pay-per-click advertising, you can have social extensions. What you'll see coming soon is Google Plus promoted posts. You won't see them on your Google Plus account. Just type in Rame Marketing. You'll see that I have an ad, pay-per-click ad on my own brand. And some people will say, well, why are you advertising or bidding against your own brand? And I do it for 2 reasons. One, because of the increased real estate I get in the results page, but also to make sure that none of my competitors are bidding on my brand name. nothing worse than coming up in the organic results when the competitor's got an ad above you. So we've already mentioned meta description, page titles. But here, this information is related to Google Places for Business, Google Maps. This information is taken from my Google Plus account. But you can see that I'm getting probably 50% more real estate than I would if I wasn't involved in this. And the other key thing is Google reviews. I think it will become more important for almost every business, some more than others at the moment, especially the hotel trade. And another thing that we should bear in mind is something called Google authorship. So if we think about websites, you've heard the term page rank. The page rank is quite an important factor in getting your web pages found. You get a mark of 10 based on how popular the page is, type of content, whether it gets shared, and we're trying to get as high a result as possible. So Google have looked at, because of some of the changes that have taken place with the algorithm, content and social media signals are playing a much bigger part in search rankings. So Google's view is that let's say Matt publishes a blog every week. That blog's really popular. People read it, people visit his site, they share it, they send it to their friends. I publish a blog every month. It's perhaps not as popular. Google's argument is, why should we be treated the same? If he's contributing more to the community, he should be rewarded more. So what Google authorship is you have to sign up for it. You link authorship to your Google Plus profile. Every time that you publish something, Google verify that you are indeed the author by looking at your Google Plus profile. The internet, don't forget, some people steal content. And Google are trying to create this level playing field and bring more honesty into the internet. And one of the ways of looking at doing it is through Google authorship. The other point is that you type in results you type in a search term, you get the results, and you see this little thumbnail. The research has shown that people are 7 times more likely to click on a link if it's got that image, even if the image is further down on the results page. Another reason for applying for Google authorship. Now I typed in content marketing Devon, and luckily for me, I show up in top of the organic results. They're quite low down because of all these paid ads. The other thing to bear in mind is this is a blog article, and this is a web page. I'll come back to that in a minute. Now, Google are experimenting all the time, and we've heard this morning that social media, a lot of social media, popular sites are very image-based or even video-based. Now this is the Google Knowledge Graph image carousel. So you type in Cornish attractions, and Google pull these images up onto the results page. If I click on any of these images, I go through to the related websites. And these images are influenced by Google+. So I think what we'll see in the future is, in the search results pages, much more image-related results. Now everything we've spoken about so far is related to the organic search results, or the free results. Free in terms of you don't pay, you have to put some time and effort in to get the best results you want. The other option we have is paid search. The paid search doesn't affect rankings. but it's a quick way to get results. Organic results can take 6 months, 9 months, 12 months to feed in. So it's more a long-term strategy. Whereas paid results, you can get results immediately. So these are text-based ads. You normally get them on the top, on the side, and even underneath. Or you can get a mobile device, top and the bottom. But there are different types of ads that you can think about. If you've got an online shop, so an e-commerce site, you could look at something called product listing ads. So people are flogging cameras. Each of these images represents a different site. It's got the cost of the item on the image. You click on it, it takes you through to that particular online store where you can add it to your shopping cart and buy the item. They have a good click-through rate and a good conversion rate, and they're normally a little bit cheaper than text-based ads. Now, everything again we've spoken about so far has been based on the organic search results display. There's another Google network called the display network, which is primarily YouTube and other websites that take advertising. So they've signed up through the Google AdSense network to say, we will show some ads on our site. If anyone clicks on those ads, we get some money, Google gets some money. So in this example, I've typed in content marketing combo, and my display banner shows, which is good for me. But there's another use of the display network, something called Rame Marketing, becoming very, very popular. You may have come across this without even realising it. So, back on YouTube again. This time I've typed and then tailor the ads depending on what you want people to achieve. So bear that in mind when you start seeing people. If you ever visit my site, my ads will probably not. If you want rid of them, just go and clear your cache, your display. Now I can't emphasize enough the importance of Google Analytics. I guarantee that every website in here has got Google Analytics code added to it. I also guarantee that probably no one looks at it, or if they do look at it, they look at the high level results. It says, oh, this is the number of people that have visited my website this month, and then you can get. But on there, you've got things like the pages that people visited, where people came from to get to your site. The bounce rate. So the bounce rate is if someone comes to one page on your site and then leaves without going somewhere else. And we try to get that as low as possible. So if you've got a really key page with a high bounce rate, it's telling you there's a problem. How many pages people visit? How much time they spend on your site? A whole lot of information, and it's all free. You just need to take the time to look at it. The other thing that's becoming more and more important is analytics will also show the percentage of people looking at your site from a desktop or a tablet or a mobile device. And you'll probably see, no matter what industry you're in, a trend towards more and more people looking at your site from a mobile or a tablet. And then what that means is you should make sure that your website is set up so that people get the best viewing, the best view they can from a tablet or mobile device. So that means you probably need a responsive design. I think, depending on the statistics, Dan lies the statistics, but basically, towards the end of this year, certainly in probably hotel and leisure, you'll see for the first time more searches made on mobiles and tablets than desktop devices, and that's the trend. We're moving towards a wireless world. So we've had a lot of focus on social media this morning. Social media is very, very important. Becoming even more important from a Google perspective, because traditionally the way the search engines have worked is on something called Boolean algebra. So you type something in, it's this and this, or this, near this, and you get the best results possible. But Google are looking at something called semantic search, which they try to determine the intent of the searcher. So it's not just the phrase you enter, it's the intent of the phrase. And that's based on a whole number of things, but critical to some of the things that are important. Content. Content is critical. Now George mentioned something about link building. In the bad old days, about 2 years ago, before the massive algorithm changes, link building is probably the key ranking factor. One of the problems was people tried to game the system by buying links from sources that had no relation to their marketplace or their website. Google brought this algorithm change. Overnight, some websites disappeared. Links are still important. Not as important as they used to be, but they've got to be quality, and they've got to be related to your site or your business. But what's taken the space of a lot of the ranking factors that link building used to have is content. Content and social signals. Content that you produce, let's say on your website or your blog, that you distribute through social networks. That content, people like it, people comment on it, people share it, people retweet it. You get recommendations and reviews on your business, and the authorship rank of the individuals in the organisation. All of these factors are beginning to play a more important part in ranking. So, yes, make sure you get all of those on-page issues sorted out that we spoke about at the very beginning. And make sure you're looking at social media and content creation. There's an awful lot that we could talk about, but the one thing I just want to say is that there are things you can do to help your business get found online that won't cost you any money whatsoever. But if you're really serious about getting your business found online, you also need to look at having a content marketing, social media marketing plan. And to me, these things are very much intertwined. I'd argue that it's difficult to have a social media marketing strategy without having a content plan. Or else we get back to this, I'm in Starbucks having a coffee. Great. If you know what your content plan is, content creation plan is, then you can build your social media marketing plan around that. So, 10 key tips. First thing I say to any business is start a blog. Start a blog. Now, a blog works on a number of different levels. Sure, that helps in the search results page. But really what you're doing is writing for your audience. You want people to engage with your business, you want to help people, you want people to find it useful, people to visit your blog, people to comment on your blog, people to share your blog with others. If you haven't got a Google Places for Business account, I'd advise you to sign up for one now. When you want to leave a review, you need a Google Plus account. So that's a good thing and a bad thing. If you run a hotel and you're looking for reviews from Google, your audience need a Google Plus account. But the plus is that because they've got a Google Plus account, that review can be verified. It's not just someone saying, crap hotel, crap food, because there's a name at the end of it, which could only help. Mentioned the mobile audience. Analytics, so important. Please, if you take anything away from today, revisit your analytics. It's changed a lot over the last few months. It seems to change every week. Just keep on top of it. Have a content and social media plan. Think about advertising. very, very quickly through something that can be quite complex. Any questions?
What are Google Circles?
Oh, sorry. Now we heard earlier on about Facebook and privacy setups and filters. So if you're on Facebook, you can decide who sees your content. Circles is very similar, but to me much easier to use. If you get a Google Plus account, what you need to do then is connect with people on Google Plus. Hopefully then they'll connect back with you. If they connect back with you, you can decide to put them in a specific circle. You can be in more than one circle. So you can have circles for your friends, you can have circles for customers, prospects, whatever. When you then post something on Google Plus, you can decide who in your circle sees that. So if you're out for the day taking those family snaps, you might just want your family to see those snaps. So when you post it, say, I want to post this to my connections in my family circle. Or if it's something you want to promote, you can select more than one circle. Yeah.
I'm getting a new website sorted out hopefully next week. And how long, because I've obviously taken account all these things, how long will it take for the Google searches to change?
Oh, how long will it, sorry, are you asking how long will it take before you start to get found online?
Yeah. So we've already got a site, but we're changing it and then going to think more about everything that's on there.
Right.
So how long will it take to
You make sure you don't need to do this, but it helps. Make sure your web developer posts a sitemap to Google. That just tells Google, look, we've got a website. I want the web crawlers to come and have a look around. Those pages will get indexed, and then they'll start to show up in search. And it shouldn't take long, days. The other thing you have to make sure is that if you've got your old website, you need to have what we call 301 redirects from those old pages to your new web pages.
On analytics, do you have a view on the Jetpack analytics you get with WordPress as opposed to, or in comparison to the Google analytics?
Yeah, I use SEO on one. I've got a WordPress site. But you should make sure you've got analytics added to your site.
Well, it's sort of analytic overload. Google Analytics, you have Jetpack, and they're all kind of telling you.
And sometimes they can almost double count.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if there's you personally would sort of go towards Google or whether you.
I'd always go to Google Analytics, but as I say, I've got SEO on my WordPress, and